In 1940, Theodor Geisel's new publisher, Random House, hit pay dirt with the first Dr. Seuss book to contain an outright moral. But unlike traditional children's stories, Ted made it fun.
I've heard again and again from people, oh, you can't preach. Oh, you can't moralize. Oh, children don't like that. And my response is, no. Children don't like phony preaching. They don't like phony moralizing. They don't like bad writing. But in the hands of a gifted preacher, there is nothing more powerful than a great lesson.
Horton Hatches the Egg is the story of an elephant who is persuaded to mind a nest egg the mother has abandoned. For 51 long weeks, rain, snow, taunting animals, and hunters cannot tear Horton away from his post.
Shoot if you must, but I won't run away. I meant what I said, and I said what I meant. An elephant's faithful 100%.
The negligent mother finally returns after all the hard work is done and tries to reclaim the egg.
Poor Horton backed down with a sad, heavy heart. But at that very instant, the egg burst apart, and out of the pieces of red and white shell from the egg that he'd sat on so long and so well, Horton the elephant saw something whiz. It had ears and a tail and a trunk just like his. My goodness, my gracious, they shouted. My word, it's something brand new. It's an elephant bird. And it should be, it should be, it should be like that. Because Horton was faithful. He sat and he sat. He meant what he said and he said what he meant. And they sent him home happy, 100%.
Horton Hatches the Egg quickly sold more copies than any Dr. Seuss book before it and remains one of his most beloved stories. It would also be the last book Theodor Geisel would write for 7 years. As he was working on Horton, Ted continually found himself sketching murderous cartoons of Hitler and Mussolini instead of elephants and birds. In late 1940, he showed one of them to an old friend who quickly got him a job at the liberal newspaper, PM. At a time when most Americans prefer to stay out of the so-called European war, Ted's cartoons drove home the horrors of fascism and folly of American isolationism.
I think a great cartoonist makes a great statement. Most of his were wonderful, encouraging statements. But he was a simple-minded cartoonist. But by definition, cartoonists are simple-minded. It's hard to get across subtle, complex shades of gray in a cartoon. He was a propagandist. His cartoons were pro-America, anti-Axis, and they were fine cartoons.
I think the fact his family was from Germany made the war situation painful and probably made him more determined to rise above and prove how he felt about America, how his parents and his grandparents had in fact felt.
Ted would not serve his country in Europe, but from Hollywood. Too old to fight, 38-year-old Geisel, accompanied by his wife Helen, moved to Los Angeles, where the Army had enlisted the film industry to do what it did best. Hollywood director Frank Capra challenged Ted to create a series of cartoons that would reach young GIs who were not responding to conventional training films. Ted collaborated with animator Chuck Jones, creator of Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. With rhymes by Seuss, they produced a series about a soldier who does nothing right.
I just learned a secret. It's a honey, it's a pip. But the enemy is listening, so I'll never let it slip. 'Cause when I learn a secret, boy, I zipper up my lip. It's a cinch to keep a secret. If a fella just takes care. He's sailing on a troop ship. Now we got to find out where. I'm a sound and silent soldier, just as steady as a rock. Here's to my little secret, with its chain and pattern lock.
These are these very simple little films that were done to teach these farm boys, these kids, probably most of them are illiterate. They've, been drafted into the Army. They're going overseas. They don't know anything about anything. And they're getting these lessons in, change your socks or your feet will rot, or don't talk to that babe in the bar because she's got a tape recorder hidden in her brassiere.
Ted and Chuck used adult humor to capture soldiers' attention. Humor that would never have made it past censors if produced for the general public. For Ted's most important assignment, Frank Capra would permit no cartoons and no humor. He wanted him to write and produce an orientation film to be shown after the war to occupation forces. The words, written by the grandson of German immigrants, pulled no punches.
Someday, the German people might be cured of their disease. The super race disease. The world conquest disease. But they must prove that they have been cured, beyond the shadow of a doubt, before they ever again are allowed to take their place among respectable nations. Until that day, we stand guard.
After the war, Hollywood producers repackaged Ted's documentaries and took home Academy Awards for his efforts. But the Geisels had fallen in love with California, and Ted would try his hand at screenwriting. When producers mutilated his scripts, he gave up collaboration Hollywood style. After a 7-year hiatus, Dr. Seuss would re-emerge to conquer the world of children's literature.
Once the war was over, almost everyone seemed to have the same dream. A vine-covered cottage, some kids, and a dog.
As Theodor Geisel's potential readership expanded at a record pace, Dr. Seuss ended his 7-year absence from children's literature with McElligot's Pool.
Answered Marco. It may be you're right. I've been here 3 hours without one single bite. There might be no fish, but again, well, there might. Because you never can tell what goes on down below. This pool might be bigger than you or I know.
Because I was a little kid, McElligot's Pool was probably the #1 bestseller in history in my mind because it was my favorite book. But in fact, it sold rather modestly at that time.
But Ted's only book using watercolors would become a treasured collector's item among illustrators.
Oh, the sea is so full of a number of fish. If a fellow is patient, he might get his wish. And that's why I think that I'm not such a fool when I sit here and fish in McElligot's Pool.
In 1947, the Geisels bought an observation tower atop Mount Soledad overlooking the sleepy beach town of La Jolla. Helen and Ted, 2 East Coast natives, set about building their California dream home. It became a whimsical retreat with a landscape that appeared to have sprung from the imagination of Dr. Seuss. A place where Ted Geisel would do his finest work. He'd put in long hours, 7 days a week, often retiring just before dawn.
He was a fantasist, he'd make his drink, light his cigarette, go in his study at midnight and start thinking crazy,
Helen cleared the way for her husband to create by managing the household, doing many tasks herself.
I really, really enjoyed Helen Geisel, who was a very skillful editor, a very loyal, devoted wife, but unfortunately she had an ulcer, so she drank milk while we drank martinis.
She was an incredible studying influence and could figure out maybe where Ted was going to be when he calmed down. that when he got overly excited about something, she might see that he might not like it so much the next day. And if he was totally fed up with something, she could see that it was really pretty good and that it might be important for Ted not to throw it out just yet.